This is Curious, the podcast where I ask questions to people who know more than I do. I'm the host, Dan Alber, and today my guest is someone who is both courageous and who redefines what courage is. This is someone who stands next to people, helping to calibrate the compass as they chart their map. This is someone who sees potential in people, yes, but more significantly, helps people to see their own potential. I know this to be true because he helped me to see mine. This is the man who taught me the mantra, I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how to get there. This is someone who has given his life to crafting the human spirit, and I'm curious to find out if through that process, he discovered it was his that was being crafted. I hope this is appropriate to say, but this is my friend, someone I look up to, and my therapist, Brent Campbell. Brent, what do you think your biggest strength is?
I'm honored by that introduction, and I'm happy to be here. My greatest strength? Is that what the question?
Greatest strength, yeah.
I just keep going. I would say in hindsight, that's, as I look back into my life, even though I've changed directions in some important ways, the main thing, the deepest thing that I'm doing, I've never stopped. I've had moments of being lost. I've had moments of trying to shut it down. I've had moments of distracting this thing, but like whatever this burning is in my heart, I've never stopped pursuing it. There's no place up the mountain where I'm like, okay, here's where we're going to build the camp.
Yeah. Is that something you identified in yourself as a kid? Or when did you figure that out?
Recently, actually, although I can look back in hindsight and see the evidence of it, but a big thing in awareness is you can be consciously aware of something or unconsciously or not consciously aware of something, but you're still aware of it, more like intuitively, or there's like different ways to get that information. And a big part that informs that I've learned is our belief claims that we make about life and about ourselves. And so I've lived the stories that we live in. It's a big part of the work that I do is helping people to articulate, to discern and articulate the stories, the narratives, the beliefs that they're living in that are deep down inside of their psyche, that are, whether or not they're true, these stories, they actually inform everything that a person will do. And so, in the background. And so, in hindsight, my story has personally, inside of my own perspective, has been that of failure, that that's the temptation for me. And part of the wound is that I fail, that I quit when things get hard. And there's some evidence in my life of doing things like that around particular commitments or things that I at one time enjoyed. So I've been living in the story that I quit.
Okay.
And it's actually just not true. I've certainly changed directions a few times, but whatever the deepest thing is that I'm doing, there's no quit.
You mentioned failure. Is failure bad?
Failure is a story, and I would say it's a short-term story. And I would say that people that use that story see it as bad.
I want to know more about your thoughts on failure, and I want to know more about when you fail, is that a conscious reframing? Or how has that changed over time for you?
Yeah. So I'm very interested in reality and what's true. And that's a great mystery. And there's a few levers, or there's a few ways that you can explore it, I guess, with some scaffolding. You can explore what's true and what's real. Like in the material world, there's the scientific method. So that's an example of here's what I think is true, and using these metrics in the material world, we can test that theory. We can test that hypothesis, and if it's repeatable, then it's likely true. But even there's exceptions within that, and anomalies will happen. But yeah, the only way to possibly know if the story that I'm a failure is true is I'd have to be at the end of my life from a particular high perspective of knowing and wisdom and insight. And I would say the only way I could possibly know if that's a true story is if I'm in that place, which means my life's already over. And there's a presumption there that I know what's true at that point, or have that perspective. And so that's somewhat impossible. Or at least if I get there, I'll figure that out when I get there. So for me, and I'm not I didn't come up with these thoughts. These are things that I've discovered along the way, living in the story that I'm a failure, and also in the struggle of trying to compensate for that through effort and striving, and proving something. It's wild, man. You don't really have to prove what's true. You know what I mean?
Right.
Jocko Willink, he's a pretty well-known name now. He's a leadership kind of guy, ex-Navy SEAL commander, and he has a phrase that there's no such thing as success and failure. There's only success and learning. And to me, that's the highest attitude, and I think it's the most appropriate and effective one, is if I make a mistake, or if, like in that short-term story of here was my objective and I didn't hit that mark, and so however you want to define that, failure isn't necessarily an inappropriate descriptor. However, at the point I learn from my mistake, or the way I made a wrong turn, or I was naive or ignorant about something, at the point I learn from it and correct it and I continue, isn't that just training?
Yeah.
So it's like learning how to do anything. It's like learning how to write, like in first grade, Did you get those letters perfect the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time? So at what point would it be appropriate for a first or second grader that couldn't get that swirl right in the cursive B or whatever, or Q? Q's are always really hard. At what point did they put their pencil down and say, not just I am failing at this, which could be great insight, but I am a failure. Now it's become an identity. So it's like, nice to meet you. My name is failure. And once it's an identity, there's no getting out of it, even if it's not true. So as long as you're learning, you can't possibly be failing. That's the highest attitude. And it's the most effective one that I've learned over many years of struggling in that shame and that self-doubt. Edison and the light bulb. All those filaments that he tried, combinations of different things, like, so let's say it's like filament number 897, and it didn't work.
Right.
Is he a failure?
No.
I mean, he's obviously not. He invented the light bulb.
Right.
And all that was revealed is he took great notes, and he had a particular critique and observation and curiosity around what didn't work, and he just kept going. And now we have a thing called a light bulb.
So we both share the same faith. Do you think when God made you that he said, okay, here's Brent, he's got blonde hair, blue eyes, and he's going to be a therapist?
Dude, these are good questions. I like it. I have no idea what God thinks outside of what
an amazing answer.
What I've learned through what Scripture has said, and my own experience, minimum experience with God, and what He says to me. But God is all knowing, and so He knows everything. Nothing surprises Him. But as far as how He'd articulate who I am and my identity, that's something that I'm on a quest to always receive and refine. So He knew I'd be a therapist. I didn't know that. Also, it's a mystery. It's quite a paradoxical thing, because I also have free will, and so it's both. It's a mystery. He knows, God knows. He's outside of time. He knows all the potentials, and He knows all the choices, and we can also choose against the design or the intent. But none of it's surprising. It's a wild thing to think about it. It's like if you were about to watch the Super Bowl and you couldn't watch it because you were working, so you taped it, and then you called somebody after work and they told you the score. Like, would you still watch the game?
No. I'd probably skim through it.
Why?
Oh, I've lost interest.
Okay.
I know what happens.
All right. See, for me, I would still watch the game. I would be bummed that I knew, because it takes away some of the mystery and the kind of like angst. But for me, in that analogy, I'm still fascinated by the game. I still want to see the glory. I still want to see how it happens. And so I think at some level, God knows everything that happens, and also I believe He's interested to see how it's going to play out. And then any way that we choose against what God might be intending, if He's willing, and if we're willing, whatever that diversion or failure might be, missing the mark, whatever that is, he can actually redeem and multiply it.
What lights you up?
Dude, I love people coming alive, man. I love, personally, those moments where I come alive. It's like I remember something. It's like some veil is lifted, and I love witnessing that in other people. The thing that lights them up, the thing that you can see it, like their eyes literally emit light and radiance, and they get really excited. That excitement is my favorite feeling, and it's what I've been pursuing my whole life. That excitement, and it's dangerous and it's treacherous. That excitement, because we can come alive in all kinds of ways. That could be quite confusing and intoxicating. But yeah, that's my favorite thing.
How important do you think it is to have fun?
Super important.
Curious why it's important and where we should be looking for it.
Yeah. Dude, that's so good, man. Dude, you come out swinging with these questions. These are good questions, man.
I told you I was just going to ask questions.
Yeah, fun is essential. Fun is essential, like celebration, freedom, optimism, happiness, play. I mean, every single child, unless they've been traumatized in utero or early on in their life, just comes out playing and having fun, like preferring it, actually. And so, yeah, I would say it's essential. And also in the deeper kind of existential reality that I explore and I'm curious to know, celebration, rejoicing is a big part of it. And I would say, how could you do any of that without fun being involved? And celebration is actually at an intersection with grief. And so the ability to celebrate is directly tied to the ability to grieve. And in fact, there is somewhat of an order to it, is that in order to get to the celebration, you have to grieve. So grief and celebration, grief and praise are actually, I've heard them called cousins. I've heard them called two sides of the same coin. But for me, it's an intersection of opposites that are really important. And that's a theme that often comes up in exploring reality, is this paradoxical, like these two things shouldn't belong together, but there's like a deeper understanding or perspective where they do. They're actually for each other. And so, yeah, I would say fun's really important. It's super important. And to lose fun is to lose a whole bunch of vitality, I would say. And why? Like you lose a lot of the why when you lose the fun. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that fun could get inhibited, and those are important to explore. And on the other side of it, fun can be incredibly dangerous and intoxicating. And depending on the type of fun or thrill or excitement, it can, and this is personal experience for me, it can be incredibly intoxicating and confusing and treacherous, and never enough too. And so, like someone who's trying to be happy all the time, that is an unhappy person. Someone who's trying to be happy all the time, because they have no room for grief. So they'll never celebrate.
Is the point to feel all emotions equally? Should I spend as much time feeling sad as I do happy? Should I grieve as much as I rejoice?
I don't think there's any should to it, unless it's like a personal discernment or conviction or circumstantial. I don't think there's any necessity to have to like make it equitable. Like I'm going to feel 30 seconds of anger and 30 seconds of sadness and then 30 seconds of peace and like something like that. I don't think it's that as much as it's a willingness to be open and available and an embedded trust that I can be with this thing, whatever it is, because needs, just like for little kids that are reaching out, the first language for all human beings is a language of groaning. It's a language of body experience and feeling and emotion and an innate instinct that I'm hungry. Now, babies don't know what hunger is. Like, they don't know the word. They don't know the meaning, but they know it, don't they? They know when they're hungry and they cry out. And so that emotion is tied to a need. And emotions are tied to needs. And so if there is an emotion that's coming to me, it has a need attached to it. And so if I'm sad, there's a reason I'm sad. And actually there's a celebration. There's a growth point, and potentially even an ego death of some kind, or an encouragement if I follow it all the way through. I've heard it said, feelings have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they can be uncomfortable. It's like riding a bucking bronco sometimes. You only get to the need and the decision point if you get all the way through that ride without getting kicked off. Most people feel the emotion and get clammed up and have judgments around it and don't go any further, or they cope it. They figure out a way to feel better. And again, circumstantially, depending on the circumstance, there's nothing inherently wrong with coping or feeling better. However, it can often become a pattern embedded in a distrust that I can't get through this. There's no way I'm going to get bucked off again, and that was hell earlier. And I don't have, see the story imprinting? I actually can't get through this. I don't trust that I'm going to be okay. And so I'm going to learn to cultivate a relationship with something that can get me through that. So if I'm feeling a feeling, the onus is on me to be able to cultivate the skill and the understanding and the mindset and the ability, not on my own, because this is a spiritual thing, man. So we're not alone in it. In that place where we're never alone, this is where the work is done. And so with that willingness and with that comfort and strengthening by what I consider to be God, the Spirit of God within me, that is available to me and anyone else that's alive, if we dare believe it, that it's there, then I can actually learn that I can go through almost any type of suffering. Now, I don't do this perfectly. I get juked out all the time. But it's possible to get through whatever the feeling is and get to the need being met, because I'm not alone in it. And once the need is met, that's usually a decision point of some kind, or an agreement, or an opportunity to name something or change something or honor something, or ask for something, and then a need gets met. And then the emotion actually goes away because it served its purpose. And so, yeah, if you dismiss your feelings, you're going to dismiss your needs. And if you dismiss your needs, you're going to lose the opportunity to grow. And if you lose the opportunity to grow, you're going to end up hunkering down somewhere, hedging your bets and rationalizing it some way, but really living a life, as Thoreau would call it, of quiet desperation, and figuring out a way to kind of make sense of that. But really, you just kind of end up living a pretty cynical life, void of any type of belly laughter or real peace, real ability to be content.
How important is it to have meaning in life?
Whatever meaning is, that's a big part of the conversation. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, that's where I came across the word really for the first time and really started to think about it. He's a Holocaust survivor in Auschwitz, and he was a psychologist as well, and really field tested his theories in real time in the most gnarly way. And in so doing, he realized, and he was an atheist, so he didn't actually believe in a God. I think he was Jewish by tradition, or by gene, his family or something like that. Hence Auschwitz. But so he ended up figuring out that meaning. So the language that he got to, like the bottom of his deep dive, got to this place called meaning. There's this word called meaning, and it's this experience where you know it when you're there. It's hard to describe. I wish I had his book with me right now. I can't remember his exact definition of how he describes it, although that'd be helpful. Maybe we can put it like right there.
I got to figure out how to do that first.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, it's a great book to read, and there's many others. But yeah, he used the word meaning as this essentially this why. If you know the why, if you know the why you're suffering, then you can engage the suffering if you have a good enough why. And so that's what meaning really effectively meant to him is, and he actually could track it with his cohort, the fellow prisoners. He could actually, unfortunately, tragically, through this experience, he could start to predict within a really, really high success rate, like who was going to wake up the next day.
Wow. Based
on kind of what they were saying and things like this. Now, everyone was equally sick. Everyone was equally in the same boat, but it's something about the will to live, that was affected for those people, and they just didn't wake up, or they died, or they got sick, or more sick, or they kind of gave up that will. And so it's, according to him, it's because they lost the why they're suffering. It all became meaningless. It all became pointless. And so, yeah, why engage any further? But the people that had the why, that could stand, whether or not it's true, but were willing to stand on the ground of, this is why I'm doing this, that choice can cultivate meaning. And according to Frankl and the work around meaning that I've learned from him, when a person voluntarily agrees to the suffering that's in their life that they can't control. Now, suffering that's in your life that you can control, meaning
Sure.
I would say it's unnecessary suffering. Like, get on it. Like, be curious about that and see if you can't figure out why that's happening. It's under your control. We want to eliminate that. But the suffering that's not in my control, such as being rounded up by an army and thrown into a prison camp, at the point you voluntarily accept, not that this is okay, not that I agree with this, not that this is a good thing, but voluntarily accept, this is out of my control. And for me, that means that's a God thing. Anything out of my control, I just automatically relegate to the realm of God, which gives me instant peace because it's in good hands. And there's a lot of purpose, according to my belief system, that whatever I'm engaging in, there's a reason I'm here, which means I'm able to get through it. And there's a deeper mission, there's a deeper game that I can connect to. And I don't have to suffer alone in it. So meaning for me is that it's a decision point to accept the suffering I've been given, not begrudging it or being embittered by it, but actually it's wild, dude, because this is suffering is the intersection point ultimately of suffering of grief and celebration.
And suffering's inevitable?
Yeah. In life?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cite me one example of someone who hasn't suffered in some meaningful way.
Is suffering a sign of something wrong?
Dude, again, amazing question.
Thanks, dude. I'm having a blast.
And again, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
I'm on the journey trying to be curious about this stuff. So I don't want to come off as
the
like,
game.
I have a lot of shame around coming off as like an expert or something like that. I want to nip that in the bud. I'm just curious and I'm tracking something. And so I'm happy to share what I'm tracking. But yeah, take it all with a grain of salt. Is suffering an
indicator of something wrong?
Yeah. Depends on who you ask and how you look at it. My answer today, although ask me in 5 years, but my answer today is both. Yes. I don't believe suffering was part of the original design for life.
Okay.
So therefore, whatever wrong means, I would say it's like not the original design. So something went wrong.
Yeah.
Now we suffer for it. With that said, now that it's here, if we're going to get a little bit more myopic, there seems to be an important conversation about the value of suffering in the human experience. The Buddhists have a particular viewpoint on it. Christians have a particular viewpoint on it. Any worldview is going to interpret suffering and qualify it in certain ways. But basically, the traditions that have lasted the test of time over the years in human history, they tend to they would interpret it differently. They would intend to, most of them tend to say and agree that like suffering is actually a mechanism that can be part of the mechanism of pure breakthrough and joy and ego death and new possibilities and new creation. And suffering can go the other way. We can also be embittered by it,
Sure.
Alienated by it, and this tends to be the default for most people, I would say, unless they can find a spiritual path or spiritual experience that actually resonates with them.
Are intuition and the Holy Spirit the same thing?
Dude, come on, dude. Man, I don't even know how to answer that, but like shooting from the hip, I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say yes, and here's why. I could be wrong, and maybe there's an important distinction here. Like, is it my intuition? Is it God's intuition? Or is my intuition actually God's intuition? And it's a curious question. one thing I would say is, in my experience of intuition, because I'm a gut guy, and following this journey of healing and identity restoration and like actual potential for life, getting into the gut is very, very important. It's an important, there's very, very important information in the gut that we need to get to. So we have to, most of us are in our minds or our heads, we have to descend out of that noise down into our heart space, and that's where the feelings are. Also, lots of noise there, and it can feel all kinds of. We can be pulled in different directions. It can be equally confusing there, but it's also just because needs are emotions are connected to needs. There's also a really, really important resource here, beyond just the trickery of I can convince myself of anything. Honestly,
sure.
Down in the gut, there's in my tradition what's called a still small voice. The head. I thinks, that's the mechanism of the head, the mind. I think to know, I think therefore I know. The heart feels, that's the mechanism of the heart. I feel to know, I feel therefore I know. There's information of knowing in my feelings. The gut, the message of the gut is just listen. If you can quiet yourself, if you can calm down, if you can discipline yourself and develop the skill to move your attention down into the realm of the intuition, then I think you get the most precise counsel and connection to truth. And in my experience, I don't believe my gut has ever been wrong. Incorrect. I don't believe my gut has ever been inaccurate. I know that I've often exposed through hindsight misinterpreted that information, or I've been too afraid to follow it, or it felt kind of silly and embarrassing, and like that's why I didn't do it. Same thing as fear. Like is my intuition God, or God's intuition? Is that what you said?
I suppose that is kind of the question I'm asking. Yeah.
I think it is. I think if I can get into a contemplative place, in like what Rohr would call contemplative prayer, so which is more than just speaking and like sending an email to God on all my complaints and requests. It's actually, that's important stuff, and it's part of the deal. But it's taking the time to listen and cultivating a general awareness of presence. And in that place, we can receive things. Yeah, we can receive things through our guts. We can actually receive direction.
Does everybody interact with that the same way, and some people are just more attuned to it than others?
I think there's a natural inclination or disposition, just like some people are more athletic than others, some people are better at math than others, some people are more like feelers, some people are more thinkers. Now, a lot of this can be programs. We can learn this way of being from our environment. However, and some of it can be genetically inherited, it seems. But I think the potential exists for everybody to do this work and to get into the gut. Otherwise, it would be a senseless story, really, and unfair, which doesn't seem to mesh with my experience of reality. Everything seems to be dripping with meaning and dripping with purpose and invitation, it seems. Everyone's going to do that process differently. Some people will hear like a voice or have a thought stream. Some people, it's very much a bodily experience of, I don't have to explain it or know why. I just know as soon as I got into this room, I started feeling heavy and I'm out of here. Or something about seeing you just gave me butterflies. Or I just knew I had to come up and talk to you. Or there's a great book called The Gift of Fear, written by a guy that did a bunch of professional security for people. And he noticed this phenomenon meeting with people who were attacked, like ladies on a bus or walking in an alley at night. And a majority of them, in hindsight, said, I knew there was something, I knew I shouldn't have gone in there. I had this impulse. I knew I should have waited for the next bus, but I didn't. And these kinds of suggestions and impulses happen all the time for us, of like, hey, just wait here. Or, hey, go in there. Or, hey, go talk to that guy. Whether or not it's a verbal thing or just an intuitive, just following some sort of pull or excitement, that potential seems to exist for everybody. As far as the mind goes, the mind is a difficult one because, especially the left brain analytical mind, the mind ends up learning how to control the the unknowables or the intangibles, namely feelings and gut intuitions. And we're not born that way. When we're born, our minds, we know this from brain scans, our minds light up, like our right brains are what's lit up, which might actually be associated with the gut, even though the gut's down here and the right brain's over here. But it's the left brain that isn't online when babies are here. That comes later when they start to speak, and then they go through school, some sort of education, indoctrination program. Again, not bad. It's inevitable. We're going to teach our kids some sort of values or worldview. And in that process, especially in our culture, in America, in the last few decades, if not longer, there is an emphasis and a preference and a value set on logic, reason, pragmatism, rationality, control, mind over matter, scientific methodology to create solutions for things. And again, nothing wrong with any of those skill sets. However, the trick that happens for most of us is we learn to prefer that. We're taught and trained to do it. We're celebrated for doing it. And this other part of us gets overridden. There's a great book called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. It's a long book, but it's all in the title. And he's a neuroscientist, I think from Britain maybe. And he realized in his study of the brain, right brain, left brain, that we live in a culture, because he's a Westerner too, where the left brain is the master. Think about, it's as obvious as, it's an older show now, but Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is a perfect example of the materialistic age that we live in, that prefers things that have certainty and things that are measurable and certifiable, that don't require any mystery or faith. That's the world that we live in, post-industrial revolution. That's the world that we're educated in, and that's the preference in our society. And so there's this like east-west split that's interestingly lining up with left brain, right brain potential, and ways of orientation. And so we live in a culture that says the left brain is the master, and the right brain, that creative part of you, that part of you that has these strange dreams and these deep intuitions and feelings, and it's kind of gooey because you can't really nail it down, and it's definitely bizarre. That part of you is a bit silly, and it's not to be trusted. It's unpredictable, and we can't exactly we can't make it fit into our neat box of certainty and expectation. And so what ends up happening is we end up preferring and assuming, and this is another story that we might live in, and therefore live in it as if it's true and make it true, even if it's not, is that, my analytical ability and my ability to control the unknown is of supreme importance. There are certain contexts where it's valuable. And ultimately, if we are to stay in that position, it's detrimental. And this is, of course, a big crisis in the West right now, and a big resurgence right now happening around an opening of curiosity and wonder, or even around like certain holistic or New Age or Eastern traditions that typically were written off, are now being entertained, and there seems to be like this reintegration at some level. But yeah, the master actually, according to McGilchrist's research, is actually the right brain. The right brain is actually the one in charge. If I have a fear, whether or not I'm aware of it, and if I'm living in a story that I'm going to fail here and this is going to be bad for me, then it doesn't matter what my mind's going to do. I could try to overpower it all I want, and every once in a while I might get away with it. But that story and that fear is who is actually driving the bus. And so all I will be doing is trying to control something that's disorienting, and it's not a proper orientation, because this part of me isn't meant to control this thing. It's meant to be the emissary, the servant. And so the right brain has the insight or the intrigue or the intuition, and the left brain is the one who has the skill and the practicality to go actually figure it out in the material world. Okay. We've flipped it. And so I would say that's an important distinction. Another way to say this is there's not a lot of language today in mental health, especially around heart, but it's in our vernacular, and it's in the art that we celebrate and that we resonate to, this idea of heartbreak, or my heart's burning, or something like that. Yeah, right. Mental health, in my training, there's almost no mention of it. It's all mind, it's all science, it's all cognitions, ones and zeros. and we're all waking. We're it seems like there's a lot of people waking up to this deeper integration, this deeper potential. And so what ends up happening is, from a spiritual perspective, if I have a heartbreak, which is a very important part of human life, right? Suffering, heartbreak, sadness, sorrow, disorientation, an opportunity to deconstruct maybe. If I have a heartbreak, my mind is going to judge that based on my conditioning and based on my wiring and try to control it. And so look at the bright side. Or, hey, shit happens. Or, you know what, screw them anyway. Or whatever it might be. The mind is going to try to get it, left brain specifically, is going to try to analyze, judge, control, constrict, and basically attempt. It's not like it has a bad intent. It's trying to help me from feeling a certain amount of pain that it's expecting. But it doesn't understand that pain is essential for me to feel and not control, so that I can get to the thing underneath.
So you're saying we should run towards pain?
Depends.
Actually, let me go back. Pain and fear are not interchangeable, right?
Yeah, probably. They're not the same thing.
So we should run towards fear?
Again, it depends. It depends. So when you have a heartbreak, your left brain, your analytical mind is going to try to control the heartbreak and therefore cut off, even though it thinks it's helping. In the short term, it is helping. I was feeling awful, and now I kind of feel a little bit better. But maybe I'm meant to struggle through that, and maybe I'm meant to die somewhere in that. Like maybe I'm holding on to and attached to something that doesn't serve me. And if I just feel better, this is why, like, a lot of times, like, getting the wrong kind of encouragement, from a good friend who just makes me feel better, like that's not wrong. And also it's, if that's all I get, I'll never grow. Fear and pain. So it depends. Generally speaking, I would say fear and desire come together. You can't have one without the other. You can't want something without being afraid, because it's going to require something of you. It's going to require for you to get to a particular frontier and make yourself earnest and make yourself vulnerable to get after something you want, because maybe it doesn't work out too well. Maybe I get rejected. Maybe I'm disappointed by it. Maybe I will realize the story that I'm afraid of being true, that I'm a failure. And so in those cases, and you can't have fear without desire. So if I'm afraid, then of course there's something I want. Otherwise I wouldn't be afraid. And so that's a really helpful tool, is to think about, if I'm afraid, there's nothing wrong with being afraid. It's very normal in the human experience. It's good information. What is it that I want? What do I want to happen here? Like, what would I like to create here? And then that fear ultimately is pointing towards a desire. And that oftentimes is a really functional and kind of practical way to approach whatever you're afraid of. So I would also make the distinction between necessary and unnecessary fear.
You're clearly very intellectually curious. Do you think that is a genetic disposition? Or is that something you learned as a coping mechanism?
Ooh.
I'm just asking you the questions that I am wondering, like, about myself. Do you think that's something everyone has? Is it something that should be desired? Or is it just a genetic disposition? And some people are that way and some people aren't.
Well, as far as what's genetic, that's not my expertise. But certainly there are behavioral disposition. There's a phenomenon that people have known for thousands of years and use different language to describe it. Like, sons inherit the sins of their fathers, or iniquity gets passed to the sons. Ancestral bondage. There's even studies in Holocaust survivors, like their grandkids that were never anywhere near the Holocaust, have similar symptoms of PTSD, and they're just by being born. So like, there is something about the genetic code. That's a great mystery to me. But there has to be something to it in regards to the mechanics of the intersection of the material and the non-material aspects of what it means to be human. So like, genetic code might have something to do with that. But I would say that it is human to be curious. I would say it's human to be curious. I've never met a child, not that I've hung out with every single child ever, but I've never once met a child that wasn't curious about everything. naturally, innocently, playfully, even if it was scary. I've never met that. Now, what I have had experience with personally and with people I work with talking about these things is that curiosity gets shut down because it's either too painful or it's too dangerous, which it is dangerous, or there's a story or a shame that develops around it based on how I'm conditioned growing up, even with the best of intentions, all right? There's probably a story in there here or there where I was curious about that thing and it didn't work out so well for me or someone I love. And so I will never do that again, or curiosity equals death, right, or whatever. And we stop being curious. Also, it's uncomfortable to be curious because there's a part of us in our fallibility that wants certainty, but we don't really want it because then we'd eliminate mystery. So as far as how curious I am, I feel like I've always been curious, always. And, it's had benefits and deficits, I would say. Of course. Curiosity killed the cat and all that. Now, I don't know any cats that have been killed because they were curious. I haven't met every cat that's ever lived. But anyway, the phrase sticks. Yeah. And I would say to lose curiosity is to lose a willingness to be fully alive, is to give up. And curiosity is very dangerous, and it can be very confusing because if we deconstruct something or if we explore something without skill, or if we do it naively, or if we do it in a way that isn't helpful or effective, or if it's flippant or something, then we can walk right into the unknown and get totally burned for it.
The first time I came into therapy, you told me a lot of people start asking questions and they get to the middle of the lake and then they either get lost and paddle around out there, or they go back, or somebody comes and gets them.
Yeah. So that's one model on how to look at this process. And the words there's many different ways to describe this, but it's a spiritual path. That's what it is. Okay. / existential dilemma, invitation, opportunity, potential, / psychological. It's like there's all of these lenses about the same thing. The language that I know how to use, that I think I used for that example, is the stages or the potentials of order, disorder, and reorder.
Yeah.
Is that familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's good language for it. So to kind of keep it brief, we're all given a particular order. Like we're all born into a particular story, a worldview, whether or not it's accurate or truthful, like what we're told or taught, either like explicitly, verbally by people around us, or like implicitly, just the assumption, the deductions and assumptions that we just end up making, seeing people's behavior, and growing up certain ways that I'm praised, certain ways that I'm punished. We're all given an order. Here's what the world is. Here's who God is. Here's what that means. Or maybe it's there is no God or whatever. We're all given that. There's no escaping it because everyone has one. We're all given that. And that's our order. And the only way, it may be true and it may be helpful and it may bear fruit, but the only way to ever know if it's real is we actually have to make it work for ourselves. And so we have to, this is not for everyone, although it's the invitation for everyone. This is what Joseph Campbell refers to as the hero's journey. But we have to leave the shire. We have to leave the place we're from, the order that we're from, and take the risk. And again, curiosity is embedded in this. But take the risk based on some intuition or some dream or some tickle or some longing or something, that's burning, or some compelling reason otherwise. But we leave where we're from. We leave the order of all that certainty, because even if it's false, there is a comfort that comes in like holding on to the pillars, because otherwise everything's just too much of a chaotic mystery. Right. And so for some of us, we're willing, or life just thrusts us into this, and every story ever written is about this. That was Campbell's point. So like Frodo in the Shire, right? Like he didn't have a dream to like go into that. He was thrust into it. But he still chose. And then there's other types of heroes that have a dream for something they see or a vision, and so they're willing to go and risk themselves for it. But anyway, the invitation is you leave that order and you enter into disorder. And disorder is another word for this, would be like deconstruction. So asking questions, breaking things down. Why would this be true? And what does this have to do with this? And, for me on my journey, it was like, what are the odds? I was raised in Ohio and given a faith, that says Jesus is the only way. Right. Those obvious questions for like a seventh grader, it's like, well, I mean, that's kind of lucky for me, I guess, but totally. That doesn't sit right. Like that feels unfair, really. Like, what about that kid in Africa? That kind of thing. And that's a super cool conversation that I've enjoyed having throughout the years and getting to deeper places with. But that was, for me, that was the curiosity, is like, what are the odds here that I just happen to be born into the truth and all that. And, there's also this curiosity in me that there's something out there still. Like, I don't seem to bear much fruit with this one. The more I try. And so that enters into a process of disorder, of deconstruction, where you leave those pillars of order and you're out there kind of hanging out in the water, so to speak, or like me leaving the island to swim to another one. You're out there in that water, so to speak, and deconstruction, that space, that potential is so essential and important. If you want to know how a TV works, you got to take it apart, right? You can't just read a book about it. And you also have to be able to put it back together in a meaningful way. Otherwise, you've just dismantled the TV and don't know anything, or are even more confused or frustrated by it. Right. And so this is what happens. This is the extreme danger. And danger is not a bad word. It's a good word. However, this is the extreme danger that is available if we deconstruct and lose our grasp on conscience or intuition or community. We can kind of take the whole thing apart. And if we do that too long, in a way that's unwise or unskilled or flippant, or we start kind of losing our sensibilities through it, or start, and this is what happened to me, like start medicating and start, confusing yourself even further through that, then you just enter into nihilism. That's where that leads. So I've basically just stripped away, this is Nietzsche, I've stripped away, God's dead, he's not real, and none of this is real. Going back to Scooby-Doo, I guess I just didn't finish that part. That TV show of Scooby-Doo from the 60s or 70s or whatever, this was the example, is there is nothing mysterious going on, you stupid kids. There is no such thing as ghosts, you idiots, and all this excitement and solving mysteries. You guys are idiots. Every episode ends this way. They take the mask off, and it was just a guy manipulating them in a costume, or like Wizard of Oz, the wizard behind the curtain, just manipulation. And so that's the world that we grew up in, is that presumption that God and mystery and demons and angels and everything else. Maybe, but it's kind of superstitious, actually. This is where psychology came from. Okay. It's superstitious, and it gets too weird, and the medieval ages, like, I don't know, those guys were kind of dumb, and like we've conflated the medieval times with the Dark Ages, and those are very specific. Anyway, that's the place. Is there is no mystery, there's only certainty, and anytime you're experiencing the mystery that excites you guys, you're just being manipulated. And so, that's the world that we live in. The right brain believes in the mystery. The left brain is trying to pick it apart. And we live in a complementarian relationship between these two parts of us. And that's the essential nature of deep diving into these things, is asking those questions, being curious about those things, and being willing to explore those things, hopefully finding something of substance or of value that often comes in some sort of death of self, death of ego, death of an attachment, death of something I've been forcing, something I just refuse to look at. And when we can empty ourselves out that way, oftentimes there's this miraculous, mysterious thing that happens. And so going back to the islands, on swimming island to island, so if someone's on a journey leaving their order in order to enter into disorder, again, extremely dangerous to do that. Although a worthwhile journey, that's the hero's journey. We could die out there, or worse. And there's a reason it's called disorder. And there's a reason when people are coming into my office for like therapy or counseling, they label their suffering as disorders. I was actually trained to do that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So you're not experiencing a very important heartbreak that's revealing something very, very important for you. You have a mental health disorder of anxiety, generalized anxiety, or OCD. ADHD comes up all the time now.
Okay.
And again, not dismissing it, but we've been trained to, in our culture, to find the disorder, find what's wrong, and then there's some sort of prescription of certainty that will treat it. And so when you're swimming out there and you get to that place of like what I would just call no return, it's like I'm 50%. If the other island is there, I'm at a place now where I could probably, now in this disorder and this deconstruction, this confusion, and it's really a hard place to be because there's not a whole lot to stand on, and it's wild and it's confusing. And maybe, my parents feel certain ways about it, because I'm leaving the order that, or I'm questioning it or whatever. But eventually I'm going to get to a place where I have to make a decision like, okay, I could go back and make do. Also, there was a reason I left. Mm-hmm. I believe there's something out there, and this is the decision point. This is the handshake. It's a very, very essential decision of will that reveals character. Is who am I? What do I believe, and what am I going to do? I could swim back to the order I knew, and who's going to judge me for that? Maybe some people do, maybe some people don't. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people who welcome me back there. And hey, maybe that was the place to be. But I never would know that if it's the only context I have. So there's always that haunting suspicion that, or maybe there's like a dream or a compelling thing in my heart or gut. It's like, no, there's something out there. And at some point, using the analogy of swimming, at some point, I got to make a decision. Like, I'm going to die trying to find this island it's a decision of will. Faith. I believe there's something there. I could be wrong. I guess I'll die trying. Or I'm going to swim back because this is way too scary. And people get to make their choice, and I will never judge someone for that choice. It's a very dignified moment. And I also have my bias on what I think is the invitation.
Sure. Brent Campbell, thank
That's
you
it?
so much for doing this with me. I'm extremely grateful that you would come to this, and very grateful for the role you've had in my life. It's been genuinely life-changing. So I can't say thank you enough.